Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined, as always, by my trusted colleague, Weston Hodkowitz. We're coming to you here from our studios at Lambeau Field. And, Wes, it is wild card playoff week for the Green Bay Packers. Unfortunately, they are heading into this wild card weekend coming off of a loss, a second straight loss. This one, 24-22 is the final score. At home against the Chicago Bears, a walk-off field goal wins it for the Bears. No other way to say it other than a disappointing defeat and a disappointing way for Green Bay to be entering the postseason.
When fans sometimes ask us about, hey, these guys are getting paid. Hey, there's very little to play for at the end of the season other than a seat or two. Go to that Packers locker room afterwards. Feel the vibes that we felt in there. These guys were legitimately disappointed. They wanted to win that football game. Yes, it was to keep the streak going against the Chicago Bears. Yes, it was to end the Bears' seasons with 11 straight losses. Yes, it was to potentially make a run at that 6th seed. But let's be honest, Michael, it's the competition of these guys, the drive that these guys have. They wanted to go into the playoffs with that feeling of victory, with that momentum on their side. As Jordan Love said afterwards, they don't have that now, but who cares? The big key to this game for me, the part that was the hardest for me to leave the building with on Sunday night, was the fact that you did lose Christian Watson. It was the fact that Jordan Love did get nicked up. You don't want to see anyone get injured at any time, but obviously a regular season finale with very little on the line, that always hurts the most. And unfortunately for Christian, toughed it out. He went out there. Romeo Doubs catches a bug. Christian tries to go out there and then ultimately ends up with the ACL tear. That being said, the Packers have to march on. They have to continue this trek through the postseason and try to learn from what they can from that loss to Chicago.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's been some bad news on the health front a couple weeks in a row now here for the Packers. A week ago, we find out that Jair Alexander would not be coming back for the postseason, and now Christian Watson suffers an ACL tear that obviously will put the beginning of the 2025 season and possibly a good portion of the 2025 season in jeopardy for him. You mentioned Romeo Doubs had come down with an illness. It sounds like he is doing better here as the Packers begin their preparations for Philadelphia. Jordan Love banged his elbow on the ground. It sounded like kind of a funny bone nerve type of issue. He left the game. Sounded like if it was absolutely necessary, he could have gone back in. The Packers played the high side of caution there and kept Love out, although he was getting ready to go in because late in the game, Malik Willis ended up kind of banging his thumb. I believe it was on the long pass to Malik Heath down the field that set up the touchdown in the fourth quarter. So there was some question as to whether Willis was going to be able to finish the game. It sounds like both of those guys are going to be okay with regard to those injuries and getting ready for the game in Philadelphia. But as Matt LaFleur said, it's also can't necessarily guarantee anything that the reps won't be limited in some respect. It's one of those wait and see things until Wednesday's practice. Elsewhere on the health front, safety Zane Anderson, as of now, still remains in the concussion protocol. Linebacker Quay Walker, safety Evan Williams, both of whom have missed some time with injuries. Those guys have not yet returned to practice. There is some optimism that they might be available for the wild card game in Philadelphia, but again, Matt LaFleur was saying it's wait and see as far as Wednesday's practice, Thursday's practice. Can they get back out there? How do they look? Hopefully, come Wednesday, Thursday, when the team is back on the practice field, maybe there'll finally be some good news in the health department coming Green Bay's way.
I tip my cap to Ketan Oladapo. He ended up playing his most extensive playing time against Chicago. Didn't technically start. Javon Bullard started, but then Bullard went back down into the slot of the sub packages, and that's where Oladapo entered, a guy that spent most of the offseason program in a boot, on a cart, because he was coming off that broken toe that I think he suffered at the NFL Scouting Combine. So because of that, Xavier McKinney is now lined up next to everybody on the active roster at the safety position. But I think you and I both know, Mike, and obviously there's the rust factor, but with what the Packers have to work with, the end of last week, we found out that Jair Alexander is not going to probably be back this season. He went on injured reserve. I think you and I pretty much can stand in agreement at this point in time. When you look at a nickel sub package, the Packers' preferred lineup now would be Evan Williams on the back end with Xavier McKinney. Keyshawn Nixon, tip your cap to him, has basically become CB number one now. Mm-hmm. Carrington Valentine has stepped up on the other perimeter spot, and it's Javon Bullard been in the nickel, which was where Keyshawn started the season. You wrote about it last week. We'll wait and see if they can actually get that group together. But defensively, it appears that Green Bay is getting closer to having that full unit together. And the thing that was the most funny to me, as disappointing as this loss was, and obviously they wanted to win it, but you do have to consider Jordan Love didn't re-enter the game. Josh Jacobs had 6 or 7 carries.
6 carries.
Scored his 9th touchdown. What was it, 8 games in a row or 9 touchdowns in a row?
Eight games in a row with a rushing touchdown. New franchise record, surpassing Paul Hornung's streak of 7 back in 1960.
Thank you for using words for me. You did that very well.
It's okay.
He leaves the game. They still run the ball pretty well, but they were making some business decisions there in the second half. Still, you want to win. You want to be able to get through this thing. I just feel like for the Green Bay finishing 5th in total offense, 5th in total defense, 6th in scoring defense, like there's so much good that is still with this team. I know it sucks to be on a 2-game losing streak entering the playoffs, but like you and I both did our Insider Inbox column, and man of life, like people are acting like the sky is falling. Like, I'm not saying this was a preseason game by any means. The Packers, up until the last 30 seconds of that game between Washington and Dallas, still had a lot to play for with the 6th seed. But, you know, the comment I made in Insider Inbox on Thursday was the Packers shocked the football world last year. Why can't they do it again? You and I will get into previewing Philadelphia in a little bit, but for Green Bay, what I felt in that locker room, what I heard from Xavier McKinney, and it sounds like McKinney and Rashawn Gary both had some pretty strong words afterwards, trying to kind of rally the troops a little bit going into the playoffs. I feel like this team has leadership where it needs it. It has experience where it's needed, and it still has a lot of youth. And I think sometimes, like last year, as much as they rode a hot streak in, I also think when they got to Dallas, it was not even knowing what they were supposed to know yet. They played free. They played like they were, had a poker chip that just allowed them to sit down at any table.
Yeah.
And we'll see again now if they can do that against the Eagles.
Yeah, I was kind of fired up when I heard about the kind of the post-game locker room scene where some of these team leaders like Xavier McKinney and Rashawn Gary had some words for their teammates. And what I kind of walked away after Sunday night thinking is, I don't know if those, A, if those words are even said, but B, if those words even carry a whole lot of weight if the Packers somehow had won the game.
They don't.
And
McKinney said that.
Yeah. So in a lot of ways, I mean, and I don't want to perseverate on the loss. I mean, Matt LaFleur took the blame for using the timeout when the Packers kicked the go-ahead field goal, and the clock management there wasn't where it needed to be, and the defensive call on the Bears' last play before the walk-off field goal. The Packers botched it. They botched it in multiple ways, and they came away with a loss. I don't know if that was necessarily the worst thing in the world because it was a game they didn't play well. They didn't really deserve to win regardless. And maybe the message from guys like Gary and McKinney in the locker room afterward, maybe it carries more and has more impact because of the loss. Call it a wake-up call if you want to. I don't know, whatever phrase you want to use. But the Packers have, they were in a good spot. I thought, the win on Thanksgiving night over Miami, followed by a really hard-fought, tough, down-to-the-wire loss to the Detroit Lions, the best team in the NFC, on the road on a Thursday night with, a crazy Detroit crowd. Then you go on the road to Seattle, a team playing for everything, trying to win a division title and get into the playoffs. And the Packers, quite frankly, dominate the game other than a couple of mistakes that got Seattle back into it, but the Packers finish it off and get the win. I thought the Packers were headed for that strong finish to the regular season. The New Orleans game, 34-0, what can you do? The Saints weren't even like a real team that night. But then these last two games against the two division opponents, Minnesota and Chicago, the Packers didn't play well. And I even questioned whether the comeback against Minnesota in the last 9 minutes of the fourth quarter, if that might have actually in some ways done more harm than good, because the Packers came very close to pulling out a miracle comeback against Minnesota. But then it becomes too easy to forget that for 50 out of the 60 minutes, you didn't play well against a team that against one of your biggest division rivals and a team that you're trying to beat, and a game that was really important as a playoff tune-up. So all of that big picture says that the Packers have a lot to flush and to move on, and to just say, hey, all right, let's, it's go time now. Mm-hmm. And the way they have played the last couple of weeks is not going to cut it. And the fact that they lost to a team that had lost 10 in a row, that had lost 11 in a row in the Packers-Bears all-time series was, maybe the final straw to say this isn't going to get it done. This isn't going to cut it in the postseason. And now it's time to get ready for a darn good Philadelphia team.
Absolutely. And I love what Matt LaFleur's message was when he's looking and reflecting on this loss. It is March Madness time. Like, anything can happen. There's 14 teams that have a shot at this thing. Yes, Detroit has a little bit of advantage there. Kansas City has an obvious advantage there, having the buys. But overall, anybody can take a crack at this thing. Green Bay proved it last year, becoming the first number 7 to beat a number 2.
And we're leading the number 1 seed well into the fourth quarter at San Francisco with a chance to get to the NFC title game.
And I go back to last year. Green Bay finished this regular season 11-6. Do you know who was 11-6 last year entering the playoffs? The eventual Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. The Kansas City Chiefs team that went 4-4 after its bye week. I understand they won back-to-back going into the playoffs, but they lost to Green Bay. They lost to the Las Vegas Raiders. It isn't always about, hey, how many games in a row can you win before you make a run? I'll be honest with you, too. I think as much as the Minnesota Vikings would have loved to have had that number 1 seed and loved to have won the North, if they enter the playoffs on a 10-game winning streak or whatever, that's a tough thing to keep winning that entire time. It's like, what kind of lessons can you learn to be able to better you and put you in the best situation possible entering the new season? Green Bay has had, in back-to-back weeks, a real look in the mirror moment. Minnesota didn't do enough to get the job done. You lost on their field.
Yep.
Last week against Chicago, yes, you're missing some guys. Yes, some guys were downshifting a little bit. You still did not like the way you played. Well, what are you going to do about it? This is your shot. As I put in Insider Inbox, the lessons are over. The classes are done. You've gone through the entire course at this point. This is the final test. Can you pass it? Can you take everything you've learned in these first 18 weeks of the regular season and now channel that towards a championship? And that's what Green Bay is going to find out on Sunday afternoon in Philadelphia.
Yeah, well, I want to get to talking about the Eagles here in just a minute, but I'll take care of some sponsor business first. Sirius XM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. And at Cousin Subs, we have something for everyone, like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub in a bowl. Cousin Subs, 50-plus years of better. All right, the Philadelphia Eagles. Saquon Barkley, 2,005 rushing yards, sat out Week 18 to rest up for the playoffs rather than go for the 101 yards he would have needed to break Eric Dickerson's single-season rushing record in the NFL. I totally understand what the Eagles and Coach Sirianni and Barkley did there. But Barkley's had a season for the ages. We'll see how things go with regard to Eagles quarterback Jalen Hurts. He's been in the concussion protocol. The expectation, I think, is that he will be cleared in time to play in this game, but nothing official has been announced in that regard yet. That offense, which also includes obviously receivers like A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, is backed up by a defense that finished first in the league in yards allowed and second in the league in points allowed. This is a complete football team. They can run it, they can throw it, they can shut you down on defense. This is a huge test, and this is an Eagles team, quite frankly, other than a guy like Barkley, who was the free agent signing and whatnot. But this is an Eagles team that ended its last season on an absolutely terrible note. They were in great position, went into a huge slump at the end of the season. They were one and done in the playoffs. They're back where they believe they should have been last year. And they're just fine with all the attention being on Minnesota and Detroit and everything that was going on there for the number 1 seed. the Eagles are waiting to make their run.
I mean, I have so much respect for Howie Roseman, the way he's built this thing up. Just starting on the offensive side of the thing, the only thing they were missing was the running back, and they found him. And to be able to take him from a division rival, not only did you improve your rushing offense in just an incredible fashion, you robbed the New York Giants of really any semblance of hope this season. And what do? You put him behind one of the best offensive lines in football. I mean, how many teams, Mike, could lose Jason Kelce and Cam Jurgens ends up going in at center, has a Pro Bowl season, right? Mekhi Becton, who we watched him in the practices here with the Jets a number of years ago, did not work out for him. Not first-round pick as a tackle in New York, doesn't come together. He goes to Philadelphia. He's been their starting right guard all year. Lane Johnson's been doing this longer than anybody. Jordan Mailata. I mean, so many. Landon Dickerson. You have this ready-made offensive line, and you pair one of the best running backs of his generation behind it. They do so many things well. Devontae Smith. I mean, A.J. Brown was the steal of the century a number of years ago for them. Dallas Goedert now is back. They are just so complete offensively. And defensively, you can't say enough. I mean, Jalen Carter's one of the most exciting interior defensive tackles in the league. Everybody knows what Quinyon Mitchell's done this year, Cooper DeJean. Zach Braun signs there on a modest contract, ends up having a Pro Bowl season. The dangers are everywhere with this Philadelphia Eagles team. Now, that being said, I actually think Green Bay does match up okay with them. Green Bay's rushing offense is its strength. The one area where Philadelphia isn't completely dominant is its rushing defense. I think they're a very respectable 10th. They have the number 1 ranked pass defense in the National Football League, which started with the performance that they put together against Jordan Love in this offense in Brazil.
Yeah.
So, as Vic Fangio, I thought, really proved this season, whatever the narrative was coming out of Miami last year, this guy still very much has it. Him, Dom Capers, the principles that they put together with their defense, this thing has been as ready-made to be able to be as functional and as adaptable as any scheme that we've seen in the last 30, 35 years. And really, that was the missing piece for Philadelphia this season.
Yeah. It's interesting to statistically, because of that, when you look at that number 1 ranking in fewest yards allowed, the Eagles allowed more than 500 fewer yards than anybody else in the league. It's astounding to see the difference in the total yardage between the top-ranked defense in the league and number 2, which happened to be Tennessee this year. And then when you look at the points allowed, only one team in the league allowed fewer points, and that was the LA Chargers. They allowed only 2 fewer points than the Eagles.
Yep.
The Eagles at 303, the Chargers at 301. Here's the question I want to throw at you. You mentioned week 1 in Brazil. It feels like a lifetime ago. And in NFL terms, in a lot of ways, it is a lifetime ago because teams are so different in January than they are in September. Is there anything, big picture, little picture, that you think the Packers take out of that game that becomes applicable to Sunday at Lincoln Financial?
Finish drives. They got off to a fast start. They didn't finish drive in Philadelphia, and then obviously had a couple things go against them, and then certainly the last play of the game with Jordan Love getting injured sort of set the tone for the first half of the season. But so many times, Michael, and you heard Xavier McKinney talk about it afterwards, I think everybody pretty much touched on it. This game is about situational aspects and how do you perform in the red zone? How do you perform on third downs? We're seeing more and more how you handle fourth downs in the National Football League is becoming critical. And Green Bay in that game did not do a good enough job once it punched the ball inside the 20. It's the hardest area of the field to score in, but you got to find ways to get 6 or 7 points out of it. And I feel like Green Bay playing on that surface, having to go down there, make the travel that they did, both teams had to do it. But that is a very difficult way to start a season. But I thought at the same time it taught them some very important lessons that sort of carried through. The games where Green Bay has been dominant this year, the games in which they've been successful, is when they are eliminating the penalties. It's when they are getting off to fast starts. It's when they are converting on those third down situations and red zone opportunities. All those things have to happen against Philadelphia, because if you don't, I mean, this offense, the way that they're structured, they are going to put up points. How do you counter that?
Yeah. What you said about the red zone, I think, speaks volumes for how these big-time important games unfold. Just look at that regular season finale Sunday Night Football between the Lions and the Vikings, playing for the number 1 seed in the NFC and a first-round bye.
Yep.
The loser is going to drop all the way to the 5 seed. The Vikings, I believe it was, had 11 goal-to-go plays. 11 goal-to-go plays and did not get a touchdown in that game. That's astounding. And yes, the final score is 31-9, and it goes in the books as a blowout for the Detroit Lions. But the Vikings had ample opportunity to be right there and even take the lead at certain times in that game. But when you can't finish drives, especially against good teams, it becomes very difficult to make up for those opportunities, right? So, and the other thing that I take from the week 1 game back in Brazil, and this sort of goes without saying, of course, when it comes to a playoff game and it's the best of the best, for the season going head to head. But what happened in Brazil speaks to how facing teams like this, it is always going to be a 4-quarter game.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I think back to, we were watching that game at Arena Corinthians, we had talked all week long about, okay, the Packers need to contain Saquon Barkley in this debut that he's making for the Philadelphia Eagles. And we had seen a couple years prior how Jalen Hurts and, as a running threat at quarterback can hurt the Packers with his legs, and you need to contain the quarterback and whatever. And quite frankly, for 3 quarters in Brazil, the Packers did a pretty good job on Saquon Barkley, and they did a pretty good job not letting Jalen Hurts beat them with his legs. But then look at what happened in the 4th quarter. Barkley got out. Hurts got out. The long, whatever it was, 17, 18 play drive, when it's a 2-point game, but they put together a 17, 18 play drive that kills like the back half of the 4th quarter and left the Packers without a realistic chance.
Yeah.
Playing a full 4 quarters is what it's going to take, and that was shown to Green Bay against this team right away in week 1.
100%, and it was funny to me too, because the Saquon game, I remember telling you this, it almost was, we were watching the Giants game all over again from December of 23, where it was, they did a really good job against Saquon, and then he started breaking them down. But it's not just about, okay, how the Packers are defending him. That's what Saquon does. He will hit you with jabs until he finally finds that opening to hit you with the knockout blow, to get you right across and hit you with that shot that you don't see coming. That's what Green Bay has to curb against in this thing. And you're not asking me for keys to victory right now, but the Packers somehow, some way have to be the better running football team. They have to be better in the trenches than Philadelphia, because Jalen Hurts, hopefully everything's good with him physically, psychologically, everything that comes along with having a concussion and missing as much time as he did. But that being said, he's been on the ice here for a little bit. He's been on the sideline a little bit. You wouldn't anticipate he's going to come back and be his prime peak self. You don't want to give him the rushing attack that allows him to get comfortable in those ways. Saquon Barkley has been a very difficult puzzle for the National Football League to solve this season. But if the Packers are to continue playing, if they are going to find their way to Detroit for the divisional round, that is the number one thing on the checklist that must be taken care of.
Yeah, this is what I think is so interesting about this matchup, and we'll be talking about it throughout the week. We'll have stuff on the website and whatnot. But this running back matchup, Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs. Barkley, obviously the NFL's leading rusher. I didn't see exactly where Jacobs...
I think he ended up finishing 5th.
Was it 5th?
Because of how many guys ended up playing and how he didn't.
Right, exactly. And that was the whole thing going into the final game. Jacobs maybe had a chance to climb as high as 3rd, but we knew he wasn't necessarily going to play the whole game against the Bears.
Michael, I apologize. Jonathan Taylor also got up there. So it was Barkley, Henry, Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor, Jahmyr Gibbs, and then...
Oh, so Gibbs ended up jumping... Well, yeah, Gibbs had the big...
Gibbs got to 1,400 yards this year.
Yeah.
1,412.
Yeah, so Gibbs ended up jumping ahead of Jacobs as well. But you're talking about 2 of the premier backs in this league, kind of in a head-to-head thing. But here's what's really interesting to me about it, Wes. The Packers have become, the 2024 Green Bay Packers have very much become a run-the-ball, stop-the-run football team.
Yes.
This is the best rushing offense the Packers have had in over 20 years. You have to go back to 2003 when Amon Green had the 1,800-plus yards. For the last time the Packers had a rushing offense this good. And when is the last time we talked about probably you go back to 2009, Dom Capers' first season here, 2009 and 10, those first 2 years when the Packers were very much a stop-the-run defense, and there have been a lot of troubles in that area since then. This is the first time I can remember in my time here, and this is my 19th season with Packers.com, where we're talking about the Packers going into the postseason as a run-the-ball, stop-the-run football team. I think the Packers have done an exemplary job against the run in the back half of the season. You look at the running backs that they have shut down. Really, what I would consider the only poor performance against the run in the back half of the season was maybe that first game in Chicago when the combination of Swift and Williams, and that kind of jolted the Packers' run defense into shape in a lot of ways, because since then I think they've done a really good job, and we've seen the consistency with the rushing offense, obviously led by Jacobs, but the Packers ran the ball pretty darn well without Jacobs in this last game with Chris Brooks and Emmanuel Wilson. This is a different type of Green Bay football team that is entering the playoffs here, and it's just interesting to me that they are a run-the-ball, stop-the-run team in a playoff matchup where the other team has the number one running back in the league. It's sort of like you can't make it up, right? There's a little bit of Hollywood to this in a sense, and I think it makes for a great matchup Sunday afternoon, early evening in Philly.
The biggest about face that the Green Bay Packers have made in year one under Jeff Hafley is their run defense, and it's not just about they finished 5th or whatever it was, or 7th actually. It's the fact that they finished 3rd in yards per carry allowed.
Yeah,
it's the first time I believe since 2009 that they finished under allowing 4 yards per carry, 3.96, third best in the National Football League. And Michael, the amount of buy-in that is involved with that, getting guys like Kenny Clark, Rashawn Gary, who I think everybody agrees had his best run-stopping season in his career this year.
No question.
Everybody wants to rush the passer. Everybody wants to get sacks. And the Packers got plenty of those this season. But like Philadelphia, they did it as sort of an a la carte, everybody contributing to it. Philadelphia's leading sacker is Josh Sweat. I think he had 8 sacks this season. Packers, it was 7.5 with Rashawn.
Yeah.
But they understood the bigger picture. That's how you get to be a top 10 defense. That's how you get to be a top 5 defense, which Green Bay did. They were a few yards away from being a top 3 defense this season. So you need to take what you've done well and you need to build off of that. And I think being able to have linebackers as well, with Edgerrin Cooper getting involved in this thing, seeing what he has brought to the table as a run defender and being able to shoot gaps and get guys down for TFLs. TJ Slayton, I thought, came alive in the second half of the season, penetrating into the backfield. That has been a catalyst to what Green Bay has accomplished. So yeah, this is, the immovable object and the unstoppable force here kind of coming together and seeing who prevails. But there's a reason why they put this game at 3:30 in that spotlight and that slot on Sunday afternoon. This is a matchup that I think everybody wants to see, and it's going to take all 60 minutes in order to prevail.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the guys that are the biggest difference in the Packers' run defense from early in the season to where they are now. It's Rashawn Gary having his best season of his career against the run. It's TJ Slayton coming on in the second half of the season in the middle there. And it's the presence of Edgerrin Cooper, who was barely playing early in the season, then obviously dealt with injuries and has been a force against the run down the stretch here. And I think, there's not a lot in terms of how Barkley ran the ball against the Packers back in week 1 in Brazil that necessarily is going to apply to this game, because this is a different Packers run defense now that they've got 4 months of games under Jeff Hafley and his scheme and the way they want to do it. That being said, you're not going to be able to win this game just by stopping the run, just by stopping Saquon Barkley, because the Philadelphia Eagles are much more complete than that. But the Packers are in a position to where, as you said at the beginning of this, they can shock the football world because of how they're built, because they are a run the ball, stop the run football team, and I'll take that into the postseason anytime.
Yeah, and like I'm going to talk up the Eagles. You win 14 games, you have the season that they did, you give that respect.
Yeah.
But I also don't want to paint the image here that this is some unbeatable opponent.
Right.
Jalen Hurts had a very rough 2023. He bounced back for the most part this season, but, he still didn't have a 3,000-yard passing season. Obviously was the number 2 back running, producer to Saquon Barkley this year with a few more yards than Kenneth Gainwell, and protected the ball much better. That's why they got to where they got to this year and why they were able to be more consistent in areas that they weren't last season. But ultimately, with Devontae Smith, the threat that he provides, it's not like this offense is an overall juggernaut that you cannot find ways to stop. And I think that's the lesson and sort of the message that has to get preached this week with Jeff Hafley is we got the guys we need to contend with any offense in the National Football League. And realistically, if you want to make a run, much like the Packers did in 2010, this is the type of opponent in the Philadelphia Eagles that you're going to have to find a way to beat.
Yeah.
And I will say this one last time, Michael. I understand the Packers lost 6 games. I understand 5 of those came against the division. I understand they had 2 shots against Detroit and Minnesota, and they didn't take advantage of it.
Right.
But if you're going to set the table and change the narrative and get things going in your direction and proving that this truly is a new season, coming back and closing the gap against Philadelphia after they beat you in Brazil in the opener, I think there is no better tone setter for Green Bay than that.
Yeah, I agree. And can't wait for Sunday to get here. We'll have more to talk about with regard to the Packers and Eagles on our next show. We'll also take a look at the entire wild card slate around the NFL. Saturday, Sunday, Monday. It's going to be 3 days of some tremendous playoff football.
18 teams, Michael, are done. 14 teams are still playing football right now. The Green Bay Packers are one of those. At this point, it no longer matters how you got here. It certainly didn't matter in 2010 with the Packers. This time, this moment, this opportunity, if you want to show that you took those strides that everybody wanted to see in year 2 with Jordan Love under center, with as young of a football team as the Packers have, this is that opportunity.
And with that, I will just remind folks to be among the thousands of football fans cheering on their team's NFL picks by joining us April 24th through April 26th of 2025 for the NFL Draft. Visit greenbay.com/draft25 for more information. And we'll call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team. We'll be back in a couple of days to continue all of the wild card preview, Packers and Eagles. It is set for the link at 3:30 p.m. Central Time on Sunday. For Wes, I am Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We will see you next time.